My name is Elise. I'm 32 years old, and I've hosted Thanksgiving dinner for the past 5 years, ever since my mother died. The house still smells like her rosemary stuffing. I make it exactly how she did heavy on sage, a whisper of clove, buttered breadcrumbs toasted until gold. It's my small tribute. No one ever comments on it. This year, the table shimmered with silver I polished by hand. 12 plates, arranged in a circle, candles flickering, wine breathing, music playing soft and low. It looked perfect, felt hollow. Every seat was filled, except hers. My mother's chair at the head of the table. I kept it empty again this year, though no one acknowledged it. My brother Matt sat beside it. Like always, like he belonged there more than I did. He didn't bring his usual girlfriend this year. Instead, he brought someone new, a poised brunette with teeth too perfect and eyes that scanned the room like she already owned it. Her name was Sienna. She smiled when she said it, like the colour. She wore red on Thanksgiving. I caught her whispering to Matt before the toast, laughing. Something about me, I'm sure. I don't know what it is about women like her, perfectly controlled, syrup sweet, the kind who says bless your heart and means die slowly. Dinner clinked on as expected. I served, poured, passed dishes like a ghost. I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room, hair neatly pinned, sweater soft and neutral, a hostess smile painted over silent questions. Then came the toast. Matt stood, wine glass raised. The room fell quiet. I just want to say how thankful I am this year, he said, eyes sweeping over us all, stopping on me last. To family, of course, to new beginnings, and to the real heir finally taking her place. Everyone chuckled. Polite confusion. Some lifted glasses. I didn't, because I knew what he meant. He looked at me again, just a flick of the eyes, a flash of something cruel. And Sienna smiled as if she'd just won. The real heir. My chest tightened. My face stayed still. I smiled faintly, nodded, raised my glass, didn't drink, because I hadn't told anyone yet. I hadn't told them that 6 weeks ago. I found the trust in the back of my mother's file cabinet, that I'd read every line, that the signature was real, that everything, the house, the stocks, the shares in the family business, had been left to me, not Matt, not both of us, me. He didn't know I had it, or maybe he did. Maybe he'd known longer than I had. Maybe that's why he looked so pleased with himself, why he'd said it like a warning, not a joke. I felt the paper in my purse like a pulse. I had brought it here tonight. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought I'd give him a chance to be decent. Or maybe I'd wanted a final memory of peace before everything broke. But now, staring at their smirks, hearing my name twisted into an insult, something inside me steadied. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't clink a glass. I just said, clearly, I think it's time we all read the trust. Silence. Sienna blinked. Matt's smile cracked. I beg your pardon, he said. I didn't answer him. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, laid it on the table between the mashed potatoes and the cranberry sauce. My hand didn't shake. I opened it slowly, cleared my throat, and read. I read every word of that trust aloud. Not in anger, not for spectacle. I read it like a quiet prayer, like it was written in my mother's voice, the mother who used to brush my hair in the kitchen while bread rose in the oven. The mother who told me once, in a whisper, that she hoped I'd be stronger than she ever was. The clauses unfolded one after the other, crisp and clear. No legal ambiguity, no room for debate. Every asset was listed: the house, the vineyard shares, the business accounts, and every line ended with the same name, mine. Elise Grace Whitmore. I read, my own voice steadying with every syllable. Sole beneficiary, trustee, executor. A fork dropped somewhere. I didn't look up. I didn't need to see their faces to know the air had shifted. I could feel it in the silence, in the weight of it pressing against my ribs. Sienna's perfume, sweet and sharp, suddenly felt suffocating, like it was laced with poison. Matt was the first to speak. His voice was brittle, like a veneer cracking. "This is a joke," he said. What? You've been hiding that I finally looked at him." "No," I said. "I found it after she died. In her old records, filed with the originals. It's notarized, witnessed. She never told either of us. But this is her last word." "You're lying," Sienna said quickly, but her voice wavered. She leaned towards the document like she wanted to tear it in half, but didn't dare. Matt, her son. "You're her..." She stopped herself. Too late? Her pause cut deeper than if she said it outright. Not her real child. That's what she meant. She knew. Matt must have told her everything. I didn't flinch. I didn't give her that. "I'm the one she raised," I said quietly. "The one who stayed." Matt shoved his chair back. It scraped loud against the floor. "This doesn't change anything." I folded the trust, slid it back into the folder, and placed it in my lap. "It changes everything." He stared at me. His eyes were wild, and for a second, I thought he might actually throw something. A glass, a plate, one of his own lies. But he didn't. He sat back down, said nothing. The others around the table shifted awkwardly. My cousin Dana looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't. My aunt kept sipping her wine, as if she'd seen this storm building for years. Maybe she had. Maybe everyone had, except me. Dinner ended without a word. No dessert, no coffee. Just the slow, collective shuffle of people standing, gathering coats, avoiding eye contact. Sienna didn't say goodbye. She just walked out with Matt, hand gripping his arm a little too tightly. The front door closed. Silence fell over the house like snow. I sat alone at the table for a while. The candles were still burning, their wax pooling onto the white tablecloth. The turkey was cold, the stuffing untouched. My mother's empty chair stared back at me, like it knew what I had just done. And I thought, this wasn't how I wanted it to be. I hadn't planned a confrontation. I hadn't wanted to win. I had just wanted them to know, wanted the truth to live outside of me. But instead of relief, I felt hollow, not because I'd lost something, but because I finally saw that it had never been mine to hold on to. Matt had always acted like he was owed everything, the business, the house, the legacy, because he carried her blood. But I carried her pain. I carried her care. I carried every sacrifice she made when he disappeared for years, and she pretended not to cry in the dark. And that had to mean something. I walked through the house after everyone left, turned off lights, picked up plates. I found myself back in her old study, where the folder had been hidden. Her scent still lingered faintly in the carpet, something warm, something sad. And in the corner, her typewriter sat covered in dust. She hadn't used it in years, but beside it was an envelope. My name was written on it, not in ink, but in pencil, faint and unsure. I opened it, Inside was a letter, 1 page, a single sentence. I hope you forgive me for never saying this out loud. You were always my first choice. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my chest. For the first time in years, I cried. Not for him, not for them, just for her, and maybe for me. The next morning, the house was too quiet, not peaceful, just empty in a way that echoed. I stood in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, my hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. Outside, the frost had begun to silver the garden beds. My mother's hydrangeas stood wilted but defiant, clinging to their last bloom like they didn't know they were out of season. I didn't sleep the night before. My mind kept replaying Matt's expression, the flicker of panic behind his smugness, the way he clenched his jaw like he was trying to grind his words back into his throat. He hadn't expected me to stand. He definitely hadn't expected the trust. But what stayed with me more than his face was Sienna's, that sharp, calculated pause. You're hurt, she knew. She'd known all along. And still, she smiled at me like she was doing me a favour by sitting at my table. I sipped the bitter coffee, then poured it down the sink. The letter still sat on the counter beside me, its penciled sentence soft and haunting. You were always my first choice. I'd read it 10 times already. It was the only apology she'd ever written me, and maybe the only one I needed. Because even if Matt had the bloodline, I had her final truth. But truth doesn't comfort like it should. It just sharpens your sight. And now that I could see clearly, the cracks in everything were beginning to show. By noon, the group text came alive. Matt, nice stunt last night. Cousin Dana, Elise. Can we talk? That was a lot. Aunt Meredith just sent a heart. Sienna, so you really think paper makes you worthy? I didn't reply to any of them. I just saved screenshots. Then I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Walker and Bell. The voice answered, crisp, efficient. My name is Elise Whitmore. I'd like to schedule a meeting about executing a trust. I believe you handled it originally. There was a long pause. Then the woman's tone shifted. Yes, of course, Miss Whitmore. We have your mother's file. Would Monday at 10 a.m. work? Yes, I said, already reaching for my notebook. Please confirm it in writing, and send me a copy of all the original documents she signed. Every version. Certainly, she said. Will anyone be joining you? I hesitated. No, just me. When I hung up, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt necessary. Like this wasn't about revenge. It was about not letting her last wishes rot in silence. That afternoon, I went upstairs, into Matt's old bedroom. He hadn't lived here in over a decade, but he still treated it like it was his. He'd crash here when he was in town, leave his gym bag on the bed, expect clean towels in the hall closet. I opened his dresser drawers. Empty. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for what he'd taken with him. But in the closet, behind a row of winter coats, I found something. A shoebox. Plain. Unmarked. Hidden. Almost deliberately. Inside were photos. Dozens. Some from college, some recent. But what caught my breath were the envelopes. Stacks of bank statements. Legal letters. A single manila folder labelled in Matt's handwriting contingency. I opened it. Inside were copies of the trust. Not the one I had, earlier versions, dated, scanned, annotated, and each one had the same thing in common. I wasn't named. Every version favoured him. Until the final one, the one my mother never told us about. He'd known, long before Thanksgiving. He'd seen the change. He'd just hoped I wouldn't find it. And maybe he thought he could undo it. I closed the folder slowly. My hands weren't shaking, but my breath had gone shallow. This wasn't about surprise. This was about control, about timing. He was trying to rewrite the ending, to make it look like the trust didn't matter, like he had chosen to let me inherit something that was never his to give. He'd planned his toast. He'd brought Sienna for backup. He thought I'd sit there and say nothing, thought I'd crumble, or smile politely and let it pass. He didn't know I'd already read every word. I placed the folder into my own file box. It felt like holding evidence. Not just of what he'd done, but of what he was still willing to do. I stood there for a long time, alone in the stale quiet of his old room, and I realised something I hadn't dared believe until now. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Sunday passed in silence. I didn't answer the calls. I didn't return Dana's texts. And I didn't go to brunch, even though I knew half of them were expecting me to show up and smooth things over, to act like Thanksgiving had been a misunderstanding, like I'd made a scene, like I was still the one who needed to apologise. That had always been my role. The quiet one, the fixer, the surrogate daughter, the replacement caretaker, the one who stepped in when Matt stepped out. He disappeared after college, travelled, partied, opened a chain of restaurants that failed within 2 years, came home with glossy women and smug stories about how he was this close to landing an investor. My mother would light up every time he came back. She'd cook his favourite meals, hang his coats, listen to his half-truths like scripture. And I just stayed, kept the books for her business, took her to her radiation appointments, held her hand when she forgot things, sold my car when the treatment bills came due. But he was the heir. Even after the trust reading, I wasn't sure anyone really believed what I'd said. Not in their bones, not the way they would have if Matt had said it. To them, I was still the shadow, still the girl in the corner with clean hands and tired eyes. But Monday came, and with it, something sharp. I arrived at Walker & Bell's early. The office was tall and cold and carpeted like a funeral home. The assistant led me to a small glass conference room. Sunlight pooled across the polished table. I could see my reflection in its surface, a pale version of myself, jaw tight, eyes hollow. Ms. Delaney, the lawyer who'd handled my mother's estate, walked in exactly on time. She wore no makeup and no smile. I appreciated that. Elise, she said simply, taking a seat. I've reviewed the documents you requested. I also saw the earlier versions and the amendments. Your mother made a final revision 6 months before her death. It is properly signed, witnessed, and legally binding. I nodded. She left everything to you. She continued. Do you understand what that entails? I do. Do you want to execute it quietly? I looked out the window. The city moved below, unaware. No, I said. I want it official, public, filed and notarized. Delaney gave the barest nod, as if she'd been hoping I'd say that. There may be contestation, she said. Your brother has already reached out. That startled me, though I tried not to show it. When Friday morning, she said, without looking at her notes, he requested copies of the trust, claimed you were misrepresenting something. We declined. Of course. Only the named beneficiary can authorize access. So he had known, before Thanksgiving, before his toast. He knew what was coming, and still, he chose to humiliate me, to act like he had control over the narrative, like it was his story to end. Did he seem angry? I asked. She paused. He seemed desperate. A flicker of something moved through me. Not satisfaction, just Clarity. I signed the paperwork, initialed each page. It felt like carving something into stone. Not revenge, not retaliation, just permanence. When I finished, Ms. Delaney handed me a thin envelope. "This is the certified copy." She said, "Frame it, or lock it away." I took it with both hands, held it gently, like it was something sacred. As I left the building, my phone vibrated again. A message from Matt. "We need to talk. You're making a mistake." I didn't respond. I saved the message, then blocked his number. Because I wasn't making a mistake. I was making something else. Space, boundaries, fire breaks between who I had been and who I was becoming. That night, I went into the attic. It was the one place I hadn't touched since she passed. Dust coated every box, every forgotten thing. But I wasn't looking for memory. I was looking for leverage, and I found it. A small metal tin tucked behind a stack of framed photos. Inside were cassette tapes, labelled in my mother's handwriting, one for every year of my life. I took the one marked 1997, slid it into the old player. Static. Then a familiar voice. Thinner, younger, but still hers. "If anything ever happens to me," she said, "I want Elise to know I chose her. I always did, even when I couldn't say it aloud. Especially then." My throat tightened. I fast-forwarded. More silence. Then her voice again. "I never told Matt the truth. I couldn't. He wouldn't understand. I hit stop. That was enough. I had what I needed, not to win, but to end this cleanly. And when the time came, I would." The next day, the family group chat went silent, as if they were all waiting, not for answers, but for someone else to make the first move. That had always been the pattern, hadn't it? No one ever said what they meant, just half smiles at weddings and sharp looks at funerals, secrets wrapped in politeness, gossip dressed as concern. I had spent so much of my life navigating those unspoken currents. I didn't even notice how much it cost to keep afloat. Until now. Now I saw everything. The slights, the silences, the way they bent around Matt like he was gravity itself. I opened the audio file I'd made from the cassette. I listened to her voice again. My mother, speaking not as a woman guarding a legacy, but as someone afraid of being erased. I heard the hesitation in her breath before each confession, the sound of someone choosing truth. Finally, after years of shadows. And I thought, what if I let them hear it, but I didn't send it? Not yet. Instead, I made a copy. I labelled it, encrypted it, and uploaded it to a secure folder. Then I made another copy. This one. I burned onto a CD. I slipped it into a padded envelope. I didn't write a return address. I just wrote to Aunt Meredith, in case Matt starts rewriting the story. I knew she'd understand what it meant. She always saw more than she said. By Wednesday, things began to shift. Emails started landing in my inbox. Formal, clipped, the estate's accountant, the vineyard board of trustees, the company's lawyer. They were no longer asking if I had authority. They were asking when I'd like to begin. And that meant Matt was no longer the assumed heir. The silence around him was starting to turn, not loud, not dramatic, but cool. Doubt spreads fast in closed circles, especially when it comes to legacy and money. He must have felt it, because that evening, he showed up at the house. No text, no call, just a knock. I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder. "Elise." "Come on," he called through the door. "We need to talk." I didn't move. I stood just beyond the threshold, watching his shadow blur against the stained glass window. "I'm not here to fight," he said. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." Go through with it, as if this were some game. As if I'd drawn a sword and he expected me to flinch first. "You lied to everyone," I said finally, voice quiet but steady. "You toasted to the real heir, knowing full well I was the one Mum chose." Silence. "I didn't lie," he said after a moment. I didn't think you'd know what to do with it." I laughed. Not loudly. Just one of those breathless, stunned laughs you let out when someone says something so absurd it hurts. "You mean, like I didn't know how to take her to chemo, or how to sell the shop to pay her bills, or how to bury her by myself while you were skiing in Vale?" His voice dropped low. "You don't know what it's like to be expected to succeed, to carry the family name." I opened the door then, just enough to look him in the eye. "No," I said. "I only know what it's like to carry the family." We stood there in silence. The porch light cast long shadows between us. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just human. Tired. But I wasn't here to rescue him from that. "I'm filing the execution documents Friday." I said, after that, "You'll need to coordinate with the lawyers. If you have claims, file them. Otherwise, stay out of my way. Elise." I started to close the door. "You don't have to do this." I paused. I already did. And then I shut it. Afterward. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't write in my journal like I used to after hard conversations. I just sat in the dark, let the stillness settle around me. Let the weight of everything I hadn't said hang in the air like dust that refused to fall. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking to be understood. I was making myself known. And they could either listen now, or be left behind. Friday came wrapped in a kind of eerie calm, the kind of stillness that doesn't feel like peace, but like the hush before a storm. I dressed in black slacks, a cream blouse, nothing flashy. I didn't want to look intimidating. I wanted to look undeniable. When I walked into the office of Walker and Bell, the receptionist greeted me by name. That had never happened before. Suddenly, I was no longer Elise, the quiet niece, or Elise, the assistant at the family business. I was the trustee, the executor, the person they now had to answer to. It should have felt empowering. It didn't. It felt lonely. The conference room was already prepared when I arrived. Neatly stacked documents, a fresh pen, 2 witness chairs, legal protocol dressed as ceremony. Ms. Delaney was waiting. She gave me a nod that wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was professional, respectful, like I'd crossed some invisible threshold. "This will make it official," she said, sliding the final packet across the table. "Once you sign this and the witnesses observe, you will have full authority to act on behalf of the estate." I held the pen a moment longer than necessary. Then I signed. Each page, each line. The witnesses added their signatures, murmuring polite nothings. A notary stamped and sealed the final page. Just like that. The entire weight of my mother's life, her choices, her savings, her legacy, settled into my hands. I thanked them, collected the copies, walked out slowly. The wind had picked up outside. I stood on the sidewalk, folder pressed against my chest, and let the cold sting my cheeks. It felt cleansing, somehow, like the kind of pain that means something is waking up. Back at the house, my inbox was already alive. Subject lines like, "Update on Vineyard Holdings," "Signature required," Board seat confirmation, Whitmore Estate. Asset transfer packet. Please review. I responded to each one calmly, clearly. I wasn't rushing. I was rooting myself. Midday. I received a call from an unknown number. I let it ring out. Then checked the voicemail. It was Matt. Elise, his voice said, strained and low. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but I'm losing people. Investors, clients. Even Sienna walked. What are you doing? There it was. The shift. He wasn't angry anymore. He was unravelling. I saved the message, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember the moment the tide turned. That night, I went up to the attic again. I played another tape, 1993. Her voice, softer, more alive. I wish I'd told Elise sooner, but I thought she knew. She was always there, even when I didn't deserve her, and then later, barely a whisper. Sometimes love is quiet because it's afraid it won't be enough. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I just sat there, letting the words wash over me like warm rain after years of drought. It wasn't vindication I felt. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition, a kind of coming home to myself. The next morning, I packed up my mother's things, not to throw them away, but to reclaim them. Her letters, her journals, even the broken teacup she always used when she was nervous. I cleaned them gently, piece by piece, not like relics, but like touchstones. The doorbell rang just as I was folding the last of her scarves into a drawer. I opened it to find Aunt Meredith standing on the porch, holding the CD I had sent. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me for a long, unreadable moment. Then she stepped forward, reached out, and pulled me into a hug. A real one. No theatre, no hesitation. I listened. She said softly into my ear, "She loved you. You know that, right?" "I know now," I whispered. We stood there in the doorway for a long time. No performance, no politics. Just two women, tangled in silence, finally letting go of what never needed to be carried alone. When she pulled away, she handed me a small slip of paper. It was a bank transfer receipt. "I moved your mother's legacy fund out of Matt's name last night," she said. She left that clause with me years ago, in case she changed her will. I just never had the courage to act on it. I stared at her. "Why now?" Her expression didn't change. "Because you did." And just like that, I knew. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was starting to ripple. The ripple effect didn't stop with Aunt Meredith. By Monday morning, the entire board of the vineyard had reached out. Some were cold, some cautiously polite. But one by one, they began to shift their tone, not because they suddenly liked me, but because the math had changed. Power speaks in silence before it speaks in words, and my silence was starting to sound a lot like control. The company accountant, Mr. Lang, emailed to schedule a transition meeting. I agreed, but only if it was held at the office my mother used to work from. Not some boardroom downtown. I wanted them to walk into her space, smell her books, see the photo of us at the County Harvest Festival on the wall. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about memory and truth. Two things Matt had always used like decorations, selectively and for show. I showed up early. The office was still dusty, but the bones were strong. Her desk, her ledger, even her old mug, chipped, with a faded rose on the side, still sat in the same corner. I left it there, let it speak for her. When the others arrived, I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I simply said, "Let's begin." Mr. Lang cleared his throat. "There's been some confusion about the role of your brother, given his historical involvement." "He was never involved," I said. "He visited, he inherited stories, he used the name, but he didn't build this, and he didn't maintain it." "I did," quietly, without title or thanks. A pause. Then another man, older, sharp eyes, leaned forward. "I always wondered why the books were so clean." He said, "Didn't realise you were the one behind them." "I was," I said, "and I still am." No one challenged me after that. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. They handed over access, reviewed pending decisions, offered legal counsel. No one mentioned Matt. That afternoon, I changed the account passwords, all of them. I sent a single, formal email to Matt through his lawyer. It simply read, "Effective immediately. You no longer have authority or access to any Whitmore family accounts, estates, or properties. All communications must be routed through legal channels. Further unauthorised access attempts will be treated accordingly. Elise G. Whitmore, trustee. No anger, no flourish, just the closing of a door." That night, I finally allowed myself one glass of wine. From the vineyard, of course. The one we used to bottle during harvest when I was a teenager. The label still bore the family name. It felt strange now, both familiar and foreign, like looking at your reflection in an old photograph and not quite recognising the girl staring back. I sat on the back porch, wrapped in one of my mother's old blankets, and listened to the wind rustling through the trees. It was the same sound I used to hear as a child, when I couldn't sleep, when I'd sneak downstairs, and she'd be there in the kitchen, sipping tea in the dark, waiting. She used to say, "You always know who someone really is when the lights are out and no one's watching." I never understood what she meant. Now I did. Matt was quiet now. No more messages, no more doorsteps, no more desperate voicemails. He was retreating, maybe regrouping, maybe unravelling, but he wasn't invisible. I could feel his presence, like a tension in the air, waiting to crack. I knew him. He wasn't done, but neither was I. There was one last piece I hadn't touched, the original safe deposit box, the one only my mother had access to. I found the key in the back of her jewellery drawer, a plain brass thing, taped inside the lid of an old velvet box. I scheduled the visit for Friday. I didn't tell anyone. Not Meredith. Not the lawyer. I needed to walk into that vault alone. Because whatever was in there, I knew it wasn't just money. It was the part of her she didn't trust anyone else to find. The bank was nearly empty when I arrived. It was the kind of old building that had never tried to modernise. All marble floors, brass handles, and the faint scent of paper and ink that clung to the air like perfume from another century. A clerk escorted me downstairs. The vault hallway was cool and hushed, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by thick carpet and silence. He unlocked the first steel door with a gloved key, then handed me a clipboard. "Just sign here. Ms. Whitmore. You're listed as sole successor on this box." I signed. My handwriting didn't shake. He pulled the drawer free, heavy and creaking, then slid the box onto the table. "I'll give you privacy." When the door shut, I stared at the metal rectangle for a long moment. It looked unremarkable, dull, a little dented on the corner, but my hands tingled when I reached for it. I opened the lid. Inside, I found what I expected: documents, old titles, certificates, some family jewellery, 2 sealed envelopes, but under it all, something unexpected. A red leather journal, the edges worn, the spine faded with age. I lifted it slowly. It was hers. My mother's handwriting looped across the inside cover. For Elise, if you're reading this, then the truth matters more than my silence ever did. I sat down, opened to the first page, and read. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. No dear journal, no teenage musings or ramblings, just entries, sharp, purposeful, thoughts she never dared speak aloud. A record of the years she spent living in two worlds, one for appearances, one for pain. She wrote about Matt, the way he turned cold after their father left, the drinking, the debt, the manipulation, how she tried to save him, how she failed. She wrote about me, how I showed up every day, even when she had nothing to offer, how I cleaned her hairbrush when the chemo made it all fall out, how I never asked for anything. She called me her lighthouse. She said Matt inherited the name. Elise inherited everything else. The strength, the loyalty, the burden. She doesn't even realise the weight she carries. I didn't realise I was crying until a tear hit the paper. Further in the journal, there were copies of letters she had written but never sent, to the board, to her attorney, even to Matt. Each one reinforced the same message. Her final trust wasn't an oversight. It wasn't impulsive. It was the most deliberate thing she'd ever done. One letter caught my breath. It was addressed to Sienna. I know what you are. I see the way you look at my son, the way you touch his arm when you think no one's watching. I know you're after more than love, and I know what you did in Boston. If you come near my estate, if you manipulate Matt any further, there will be consequences. This letter is not a threat. It's a warning. Try me. My pulse quickened. I stared at the date. It was 2 years before she died. So she'd known. Not just about Matt's failures, but about Sienna's manipulation too. There was more. Tucked into the back of the journal was a flash drive, labelled only with a date and the word insurance. I slid it into my bag. My hands were trembling now, not with fear, but with clarity. When I left the bank, the sun had already shifted. The light was golden, slanting low across the sidewalk. I walked home slowly, each step heavy with revelation. I didn't stop at the house. I went straight to my mother's old office and powered on the desktop she used to write emails on. It still booted slowly, still made that soft wheeze as if waking up reluctantly. I plugged in the flash drive. There were 4 video files, all time-stamped, all surveillance clips. One showed Matt rifling through her file cabinet late at night. One showed Sienna copying data from her computer onto a separate drive. Another showed them together, arguing in the living room. My mother's voice off camera, sharp and clear. You think you deserve this. You've done nothing but leech from me and lie to her. And the final clip. It wasn't long. Just a single line, spoken by my mother directly into the camera, looking worn, pale, but resolute. If anything happens to me, Elise is the only one who gets to decide what justice looks like. I watched that one twice. Then I made copies. One on my drive. One uploaded to the cloud. One burned onto a disc labelled "Play Me if they push back." Because now I knew why Matt had looked so certain. He thought I'd never find this. But I had. And the next time he came for me, he wouldn't be walking away. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. Fear had passed through me already, wrung me out, and left something colder in its place. This was focus. Cold, clean focus. The journal lay beside me, spine open, pages warped slightly from my tears. I had read it twice more, front to back, as if the act might summon her voice into the room. It didn't. But it did something else. It made me certain. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This wasn't even about revenge. It was about truth. Because what Matt and Sienna had tried to take, quietly, under layers of charm and tradition and plausible deniability, wasn't just the money. It was my mother's name, her trust, her final, most fragile act of courage, and they had treated it like a mistake to be undone. So I stopped waiting. First, I printed transcripts of the surveillance videos, highlighted the timestamps, attached copies of the journal excerpts that corresponded. I wrote a cover letter to the family board, to the lawyer, to the Vineyards Ethics Committee, not accusing, just stating facts, just showing what they had refused to see. I sent each envelope by registered courier. Then I called Ms. Delaney. I need to amend the trust. I said, to include what an addendum. I replied, something symbolic. She didn't ask questions, just scheduled the meeting. That same day, I drafted a letter to Sienna. Not angry, not pleading, just final. Sienna, I know who you are. I've seen what you've done, not just to me, but to her. Your access to the estate is permanently revoked. You are not welcome on any Whitmore property. Any attempt to interfere further will be met with legal action. If you push, I will respond. And this time, you won't be able to smile your way out. Do not contact me again. Elise, I sealed it. Hand-delivered it to her apartment myself. Left it with the doorman, who gave me a strange, sideways look, the kind that says, "You're not the first woman to show up here with a final message." Let him wonder. By Friday, the shift was undeniable. Matt emailed through a third-party address. A long, rambling attempt at apology. I panicked. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You don't understand what it's like, always being the one expected to carry the name, to perform. You were always the favourite. You just didn't see it. That line stopped me cold. The favourite, that's what he thought. He had no idea. He had no idea what it meant to sit beside her hospital bed while she asked for him. Again and again, forgetting I was even in the room. No idea what it felt like to spoon broth into her mouth when her hands couldn't stop shaking. No idea how often I'd wished he would show up, even just once, to take some of the weight off me. I didn't respond to his message. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I opened the letter I'd written weeks ago, the one I never meant to send. It was to my mother. You chose me, and I didn't know what to do with that. For a long time, I thought love had to be spoken, that silence meant doubt, but you weren't silent. Were you? You were steady? You were tired? You were terrified? And in the end, you trusted me more than anyone else. I forgive you for the silence, and I hope you forgive me for waiting so long to believe it. I burned it after I read it, not out of anger, but because some words are meant to be let go. Later that day, Meredith called. "Your video," she said, "the one of them arguing." I sent it to the board. Quietly. I didn't ask why. She answered anyway. "They were trying to get ahead of you. I thought they should see the truth before someone else shaped it." "Did it change anything?" She hesitated. Yes and no. People still want to believe Matt can be fixed, that he just needs structure, a role, a little grace. "And what do you believe? I believe you don't owe him anything," she said, and neither did she. The silence between us was tender. Before she hung up, She said something I didn't expect. "You were never just the girl who stayed. Elise, you were the girl who carried the house on your back and still set the table for everyone else." That night, I opened the insurance video one more time, just her face, close to the camera. If anything happens to me, Elise is the one who decides what justice looks like. It wasn't an instruction. It was a gift, and I was ready to accept it. The letter from the Vineyard's Ethics Committee came 2 days later, typed, formal. But under the legalese, the message was unmistakable, given the substantiated evidence provided. Matthew Whitmore's privileges and board observer status have been revoked indefinitely. All business dealings with Sienna Larkson have been suspended pending legal review. Control and decision-making authority rests solely with Elise Grace Whitmore, executor and trustee of the Whitmore estate. I read it 3 times. Then I placed it in the file box with the trust, the journal, and the disc. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like resolution. A closing of something too long kept ajar. There was no celebration, no bottle popped. I just stood in the middle of the kitchen, the same place where I had once diced onions while my mother dictated grocery lists, where I had once wept alone with my sleeves rolled up to my elbows, and I exhaled. It was done. At least the part they could touch, but something inside me still pulsed. Not revenge, not pain. Just a restless grief, the kind that doesn't scream, but hums low like a bruise beneath the skin. Because even now, part of me wanted to know why. Why Matt did it. Why Sienna lied. Why no one, not even my mother, had just said it aloud while there was still time. But that's the cruel thing about silence. It lets the worst people fill in the blanks. And they had filled mine with doubt for so long. I had mistaken it for truth. Late that evening, I drove to the cemetery. Not for ritual, but because the question wouldn't stop echoing. I brought her journal, a single candle, her scarf. The wind was sharp, cutting through my coat as I walked down the familiar path. Her grave was neat, well kept, blanketed by fallen leaves. I knelt, lit the candle. "I found the tapes," I said softly, "and the drive. I know what you were trying to do." The trees rustled behind me, not answering, but not ignoring either. "I don't know if I did it right," I whispered. "I tried to honour you." But I think part of me just wanted someone to say, I mattered, out loud, and no one did. Not until it was already too late. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Instead, I pulled a folded paper from my coat, the final copy of the amended trust, with the new addendum I had added at Ms. Delaney's office. Effective immediately. The Whitmore Estate Legacy Scholarship is established in the name of Elise Grace Whitmore, to be awarded annually to young women who have served as primary caregivers within their families and have demonstrated strength in silence. I laid it at the base of the stone. "You wanted me to carry the name." I said, "So I will," but not the way they wanted me to. I stayed until the candle burned low. When I left, the wind had softened. I felt no eyes on me, no ghosts, just my own breath, visible in the cold, and the sound of gravel crunching beneath my shoes. When I got home, the final blow had already begun to unfold. My inbox was filled with notifications. The video, the one of my mother confronting them, had been leaked. Not by me. I don't know who did it. Maybe someone on the board. Maybe Meredith. But there it was, circulating quietly, passed between lawyers, surfacing in whispers on business forums. The kind of story that doesn't make headlines, but makes reputations bleed behind closed doors. Matt's silence, which had felt like retreat, now felt like erasure. I imagined his calls going unanswered. The closed doors, the investors pulling out, the way people stopped making eye contact in meetings. Sienna's curated social media went blank within hours. They were unravelling, not because I destroyed them, but because I stopped letting them define me. I didn't reply to the messages, didn't offer a comment. I just made tea, sat in the living room, watched the wind lift the edges of the curtains like breath. Then I picked up my journal, my own this time, and wrote a single sentence. Justice didn't look like fire. It looked like silence, finally broken. I thought the silence after the storm would feel like peace. It didn't. It felt like standing on a beach after a wave had torn everything away. The sand still wet, debris scattered, sky too bright, quiet, yes, but not calm. I stayed in the house for days, not hiding, just being. I answered only what needed to be answered, signed papers, scheduled transfers. I watched as more of Matt's business ties slipped away. The family accountant emailed a brief notice 2 silent partners had pulled their capital. One of them cited ethical concerns. Still, I didn't celebrate. I think that's what no one tells you. Justice doesn't come with music. There's no soundtrack, no rush of victory. There's just quiet. And maybe that's what I needed most. Stillness, clarity, and space to finally decide what I wanted. Because for so long, I had existed inside other people's stories. My mother's regrets, Matt's ego, Sienna's hunger, even the family's collective denial, the way they held tradition up like a shield, even as it cut the wrong people. I hadn't written my own ending. I'd only erased theirs. Until now. I started by moving out of the main bedroom. My mother's room. I had been sleeping there since she died, like it made me closer to her somehow. But the truth is, it kept me in her shadow. I packed her things with care, folded every blouse, wrapped each heirloom in tissue. Then I stored them in the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. I didn't throw anything away. I just let her rest and made space for myself. Next, I brought fresh paint into the old office, not to erase her, but to soften the ghosts. I painted the walls a pale, dusty rose, a colour she hated, but I loved. Then I moved my desk in, set up the journal, the files, the scholarship paperwork, and I wrote pages and pages, not for court, not for anyone else, just for me. I wrote about the nights I sat in silence while the family toasted Matt, about the Thanksgivings where I served every dish and no one asked if I was okay. I wrote about the way my mother's eyes changed in her final months, how fear made her both sharper and softer, how she tried, in her own fractured way, to love me without words. And I wrote about the journal, the tapes, the day I opened the safe deposit box and saw proof that the silence had never been apathy, just fear, and maybe love, too. The kind of love that's messy, unspoken, and desperate to protect something too fragile to survive outside the dark. Then came the letter, a cream envelope, no return address, just my name. Handwritten in a rushed scrawl I hadn't seen in years. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were just 3 lines. Elise, you won. Are you happy now? No greeting, no apology, no signature, just bitterness. Still trying to twist the story so he wasn't the villain, just the wounded party. I didn't respond. Instead, I took the envelope, slid it into the journal on a blank page, and wrote beneath it in pen, Winning means nothing when the other person was never playing fair. Then I closed the book and left it there. Later that week, I received a call from a young woman named Cara. Her voice was soft, but practiced, like someone used to managing her emotions in tight spaces. She was the first recipient of the Whitmore Legacy Scholarship. She told me about caring for her father through Parkinson's, about dropping out of college, working nights, studying by flashlight while he slept, about feeling invisible until the letter came, the one that said she'd been chosen, not because of grades, but because someone had seen her. I didn't say much during the call, just listened. When she thanked me, really thanked me, like it came from her ribs, I had to turn away from the window to hide the tears in my throat. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen again, lit a candle, not out of grief, but out of habit, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in so long it almost startled me. Peace, not joy, not closure, just a stillness that didn't ache, a quiet that didn't hurt. Spring came slowly. The frost retreated one morning without warning, and crocuses emerged through the dry garden bed, like secrets finally allowed to speak. I watched them from the porch, knees pulled to my chest, a second mug of tea cooling between my palms. It was strange, how soft the world could be after such sharpness. I hadn't heard from Matt again. Not directly, but word travelled. Sienna had left town, quietly, without forwarding information. Her consultancy firm shuttered within weeks. Whispers of lawsuits, breached NDAs, a partnership that collapsed under scrutiny. Matt, I heard, had moved in with a friend across the river, lost his speaking gig at the Small Business Summit. The board had rescinded its invitation. Sponsors pulled out. Meredith called once more. She didn't gloat. She never did. She simply said, "It's over now. You did what she couldn't." And she was right, not because I won, but because I finished it. I ended the story they thought they could write without me. But now, I had to figure out what came next. I was 32, and for the first time, I didn't belong to anyone else's vision of me. Not my mother's silent hope, not Matt's legacy, not the family's polite hierarchy of who mattered most. Just me. So I asked myself something I hadn't dared ask in years. What do you want, Elise? The question felt radical and terrifying. The answer didn't come in words. Not at first. Just feelings. Small pulls. I wanted warmth. I wanted a garden that bloomed on my terms. I wanted laughter in rooms that once only held duty. I wanted softness that wasn't mistaken for weakness. So I started small. I cleared out the guest room and turned it into a studio. Painted one wall chalkboard, black, and wrote quotes across it in white pastel. Things she had said, things I wished she'd said. I opened the scholarship to 3 new recipients, all from towns like mine, invisible towns, with invisible daughters doing too much in houses too small. I cooked again, not because I had to, not because guests were coming, but because the act of cutting garlic and sautéing onions felt like prayer, like something alive and sacred. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I invited Dana over. She was the only cousin who had ever hesitated when the lines were drawn, the only one who had texted not to guilt me, but to ask if I was okay. I'd ignored it then, but now I was ready. She arrived with tulips and 2 bottles of wine. I brought options, she said, holding them up like a peace offering. We sat in the garden, where the hydrangeas were beginning to return. She didn't mention Matt, I didn't bring up Thanksgiving. Instead, she said, "You know, I always thought it was weird how much you did for everyone." I raised an eyebrow. "I mean it," she said. "Like, you'd show up early, stay late, clean after the mess. And they'd still talk about Matt like he was the second coming. And you just smiled through it." I took a sip of wine. I thought if I kept smiling, they'd eventually see me. She nodded. "Quiet. I see you now," she said. The words hit deeper than I expected. And in that moment, I realised something. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't even need resolution. I just wanted to build something true, not perfect, just real. That night, I reopened the last drawer of my mother's old desk, found the Polaroid we had taken the day she finished chemo. We were both too thin, both smiling too hard. But her hand was wrapped around mine so tightly, it looked like she was afraid I'd vanish. On the back, she'd written "Still here," somehow, and so was I. The house was different now. It wasn't louder, it wasn't brighter, but it breathed easier, like it no longer needed to hold its breath. Grief had softened into something manageable, like an old coat you finally stopped wearing, not because you stopped loving it, but because you no longer need it to survive the cold. I began opening the windows again, letting in the breeze, letting in the world. I started volunteering at the library downtown, 2 days a week, mostly shelving books and helping teenagers with late fees and tangled printer cords. No one knew my name there. No one cared about the trust, the tapes, the scholarship, or what my last name meant. And that anonymity, it felt like freedom. There was a boy who came in every Thursday, 18, maybe, always quiet, always alone. One afternoon, I saw him holding a children's picture book, The Bear Who Stayed. His hands trembled when he turned the page. He caught me watching and looked up, embarrassed. "I used to read this to my sister," he said. "Before we got split." I nodded, said nothing. He closed the book carefully and whispered, "It's weird how things stay with you." I smiled. It's not weird. I said, "It's the only way they don't disappear." That's when I knew not everything needed to be rebuilt. Some things just needed to be remembered. Gently, quietly. That weekend, I hosted dinner. Not a grand event. Just Dana, Meredith, 2 scholarship coordinators, and one of the new recipients, a woman in her 20s named Lee, who cared for her grandmother while putting herself through pharmacy school. I made my mother's rosemary stuffing. Not because I was trying to imitate her, but because this time I wanted to share what she had taught me, how love can live in repetition, in recipes, in rituals, even in grief. The table was full, but not crowded. The laughter was soft, not forced. And for the first time, no one toasted to Matt. No one mentioned legacy. They toasted to me, to the scholarship, to the future. After dessert, Lee pulled me aside. "I never thought someone like me would be chosen for anything," she said. "But your letter, it didn't feel like an award. It felt like someone saw me. Really saw me." I touched her arm gently. "That's the point." She smiled. Her eyes were wet. "You have no idea what it means." But I did. Because for most of my life, I had longed for exactly that. Not applause, not praise. Just to be seen. After everyone left, I stood alone at the sink, hands deep in suds, the window open to the cool night air. I looked around the kitchen. Same floor, same chipped tile, same old drawer that stuck when you pulled it too fast. And yet, everything was different. The silence wasn't haunted anymore. It was full. The only message I received that night was from an unknown number. Just one line. I'm sorry. I didn't ask who it was. Didn't need to. Matt's apologies always came too late. And too thin. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. I just let it sit there. Like a stone at the bottom of a river. Sunk. Still. The next morning, I dropped a small package at the post office. No return label, no card. Inside, a copy of the final amended trust. And a note, handwritten. This is what she chose. This is what I protected. I won't need to explain it again. I addressed it to his new P.O. box, the one I wasn't supposed to know about. Let him read it. Let him sit with it. Let him carry the silence this time. As for me, I had a garden to tend, books to shelve, letters to write, and finally, a life that belonged to no one else's expectations but mine. The anniversary of her death came quietly. No phone calls, no flowers, not even the usual thinking of you text from distant relatives. It surprised me at first, and then it didn't. Grief is inconvenient to the people who never had to carry it. But I didn't light a candle. I didn't wear black. I didn't play her favourite song or reread her letters or kneel beside her grave. Instead, I woke up early, made tea, and drove to the coast. She used to talk about the ocean like it was another version of God, vast, relentless, unknowable. When I was little, she'd take me to the cliffs near Morgan's Bay. We'd sit in silence for hours, just watching the water smash itself into stone, over and over, like it needed to be reminded it could still break things. That's where I went. The tide was low when I arrived. Wind crisp, salty. I wore her scarf, the one with the embroidered edge, soft from years of wear. Not to mourn her, not to walk beside her. I found the same bench we used to sit on. Carved initials still scarred the wood. Some had faded. Others were sharp and new, like grief, like memory. I sat there for a long time. No journal, no phone, just me, the sea, and the sound of crashing that never stops. Somewhere behind me, a gull screamed, and I remembered what she'd said once, almost absently, as we watched a wave swallow itself. The ocean doesn't apologise. It just returns. She hadn't meant anything deep by it, but now, years later, it echoed differently. It sounded like freedom, like a lesson, because for so long, I had been apologising for my presence, for my silence, for my strength, for the space I took up, for daring to ask why love had to be earned when I gave it so freely. But I wasn't the one who needed to apologise. I was the one who had returned. I stood at the cliff edge, wind tugging at my coat, and whispered something I hadn't dared say aloud since the beginning. I did it, Mum, not because she needed to hear it, but because I needed to say it. That evening, I stopped at a tiny market on the way home, bought lemon thyme, a bottle of wine, a bar of dark chocolate I didn't need, and when I got back to the house, my house, I lit the fireplace, curled into the chair by the window, opened a book, and didn't think about anyone but myself. Not Matt, not Sienna, not the people who stayed silent when they should have spoken, not even her. I thought only of the version of Elise who had survived, the one who made it through years of being overlooked, who didn't scream or rage or beg, who simply stood up and read the trust, one Thanksgiving night, and let the truth land like thunder in a room that thought it knew her. And now she was reading for pleasure again. She was sleeping through the night, She was learning how to live with both hands open, not clenching the past, not reaching for approval, just holding space for herself. Just after midnight, I walked through the quiet house, turned off the lights, and paused at the mirror in the hallway. For years, I'd avoided this mirror. Too many ghosts lived in my reflection. But now, I looked, and what I saw wasn't who I used to be. Not the tired girl with hands always busy, shoulders always tense, but a woman, calm, clear. A woman who didn't burn things to the ground. She let them fall quietly. A woman who never shouted, but still got the last word. The final letter came in April. It arrived the way all endings do. Unexpected, unsigned, and slightly late. A thin envelope. No return address. Postmarked from a city I'd never been to. Inside a check. A substantial one. No note. No name. Just a bank slip confirming the closure of an account that had once belonged to the restaurant chain Matt tried to build, the one he'd poured our mother's money into, hoping to turn failure into legacy. There was only one sentence, written in neat block letters across the bottom margin I owed her. I owe you. I stared at it for a long time. No signature, but I didn't need one. It was his way of bowing out, not loudly, not cleanly, but finally. I deposited the cheque into the scholarship fund. Didn't tell anyone. Not out of grace, but because not all endings need announcements. Some just need to stop echoing. And with that, the last loose thread slipped from my fingers. There were no more texts, no more calls, no more ghosts hiding in voicemail messages or old boxes in the attic. The house settled into its quiet, not hollow, not sad, just settled. And I did too. That spring, I opened the east window for the first time in years, the one that had swollen shut from years of disuse. I had to wedge it free with a screwdriver and my whole shoulder. When it finally gave way, a gust of cool wind filled the room. It smelled like earth and lavender, like beginning. I took the old rocking chair from storage, set it beside the window, and began using the space for morning writing. Not grand stories, not revenge, just memories, thoughts, letters to no one, letters to myself. I wrote about the girl I used to be, the one who served Thanksgiving dinners and smiled through silences that cut deeper than any insult. I wrote about my mother, not as a myth, not as a martyr, but as a woman who made mistakes, loved imperfectly, and still tried, until her last breath, to protect the one thing she believed in, me. And I wrote about Matt, not to forgive him, but to release him. Because that's what letting go actually is, not a moment, not a gesture, but a slow loosening of the rope that's kept you tethered to someone else's wreckage. I kept the trust papers in a small safe. I never reopened the flash drive. It had served its purpose, and I stopped checking for emails from the board. They respected me now, not out of obligation, but because they had learned, slowly, the weight of my silence. One evening, Lee, the scholarship recipient, invited me to her graduation. I went. She wore white, spoke with clarity, and when she looked out into the crowd, she found my face and smiled. Afterward, she hugged me hard. I didn't think I'd make it, she whispered. I smiled into her hair. Neither did I. As I drove home, the sun was setting. Long shadows stretched across the hills. The road ahead curved into a kind of gold that felt like a promise. And I realised something. I didn't miss the past anymore. I didn't need to explain myself to the people who never listened. I didn't need their apologies or their understanding, or their names scribbled across envelopes like apologies mailed too late. I had made peace not by fighting back, but by standing still when it mattered most, by reading the truth aloud when they expected me to stay silent, by becoming the thing they underestimated most, not the heir, the keeper, the witness, the end,